Hello everybody, Bruce McGonigal here. So international students coming to Canada are being subsidized by Canadian taxpayers. In British Columbia, I just posted this video earlier of the $1 billion that British Columbians are paying so foreign students can live well while coming to BC and going to schools. Why is this happening? Well, let me explain how important it is to be able to put students into certain ridings. Okay. So imagine China. We'll use China as an example. China wants to gain political influence and maybe even capture certain ridings politically inside Canada. Well, how would they do that? Well, we know that China is very rich and China has laundered a lot of money into Canada and owns a lot of homes. So what they can do is they can take Communist Party of China youth, whether they're children or grandchildren, send them to Canada, put them up in these homes that are in swing ridings or in the very ridings that the CCP wants to make sure that their candidates win, okay? And that youth then turns around and applies to become a Canadian citizen. When the youth is done and goes back to China, one day they get a mail envelope coming in from Canada saying, congratulations, you're now a Canadian citizen. Well, why does this matter, folks? Let me explain very clearly from Elections Canada's own website. As it says, is it true that electors can only be on the International Register of Electors if they have been away from Canada for less than 5 years? Meaning, can you vote from outside Canada if you have not lived in Canada for 5 years? Here is the response. It says, no, an elector who meets the eligibility criteria outlined above can apply to be added to the International Registers of Electors regardless of how long they have been living abroad. So it's basically as long as you can prove that you're a Canadian citizen, you can vote forever without actually coming back to Canada. And this is where it gets really fine detail stuff. So then it says, how does Elections Canada determine my riding? It says, on your application, you must indicate your last address before leaving Canada, which determines the electoral district for which your vote will be counted. You must use a physical address. You cannot use a post office box or rural route, except in areas where no other physical address is available. This address cannot be changed after your name is added to the International Register of Electors. Now, that doesn't mean your ballot's going to go to that home in Canada. No, your ballot will be sent to wherever you ask for it overseas. So what this means is that you will be able to, in perpetuity, vote in potentially a swing riding of your choice in Canada for as long as you want without ever coming back here or ever having skin in the game for what your vote is doing. And you can imagine if you can start to amass 200, 300, or 400 of these votes in China, that you could dramatically swing ridings where maybe 30 votes swing the riding, or 40 votes, or 120 votes, like we saw in British Columbia. I think Surrey-Guildford, which is actually a big riding, it was only won by 22 votes, and we know mail-in voting played a key role in that for the BC NDP. So you can see right now that there's a lot of incentive for the government to subsidize student housing, especially if the government gets to pick where that housing is and who the students are who goes into that housing, so that they can start to build up their own list of people who are now their new voter base that don't ever have to come back. And the worst part here is, folks, the only people checking to make sure any of this is valid and legit is the government itself. In fact, in British Columbia here, we had 3 people doing screening for over 100,000 mail-in vote requests, and we know that over 85,000 votes were actually added into the election results, and we have no idea, and we're apparently not allowed to know, if that actually affected outcomes from ridings and where those votes came from. I've asked repeatedly, and I keep getting stonewalled saying, we don't really have access to that information. We don't have the time to do it. So clearly there's a lot going on here. And if you start to really put the pieces together, it comes down to a situation where our democracy is flat out being rigged. This is a way to rig it. so that you don't actually have to have accountability. If you or I go vote in a polling station, you've got scrutineers, you got people who check your ID, and you go through this entire process. With this mail-in voting thing, you don't have any of that. It's all arbitrarily decided by 3 people, and how the hell are the scrutineers, if there even is any, going to know what is going on? They're not. So folks, why are our politicians not speaking out more about this? John Rustad, thankfully for the Conservatives, has been. Why isn't Pierre Poilievre speaking up about this? Why aren't the NDP federally speaking up about this? Why aren't the Bloc Québécois speaking up about this? Everybody should be so concerned that it is super easy to rig elections in Canada if you're the government. Because this is how you end up with a system where the government doesn't really give a damn about what people think about the government. And the government can just create whatever polling numbers they want because they know that they could have a stack of 500 to 600 votes that are phantom votes, right? This is the key. Think about it. China turns around and gets all of these people to come to Canada, and then China takes over the right to use their votes whenever China wants to. So China automatically could set up their own department where they literally have people and all they do is send in fake mail-in votes using valid identifications for Canadians that our government allowed to go through this system. There's a solution to fix this, folks. And that solution is, if our courts have decided that you can live outside of Canada for as long as you want, then what we simply need to do is make one new riding, period, for all overseas votes. And all overseas votes go into that one riding. And that would stop all of this gerrymandering going on in our elections. Because believe it or not, that is exactly what this was set up to do. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's no way in the world that this was never set up to be anything more than a vote rigging scheme, folks. So everybody needs to pay attention to this. I really hope you speak to your MLAs and your MPs across Canada about this and advocate for the changes that I'm proposing to make, which is where we have only one new riding set up for all international votes, and we can have one MP or one MLA, whether it's provincial or federal, who is responsible for those votes from each party. So each party can run a candidate for the international votes. And that would allow us to eliminate the gerrymandering going on in our elections. Stop the rigging of the elections. It would at least give us a fair chance where democracy stands a chance. Like it is right now, it doesn't stand a chance, folks. Take care, everybody. Have a great one.